Dear audience, this is the new episode of Unboxing Russia, conducted by our two selves, Pradnya Bivalkar and Ekaterina Schulmann. We have taken a short break from our customary once a month routine.
Twice a month routine.
We do try to have a twice a month routine, but we have missed at least one episode for reasons beyond our immediate control. All the more are we happy to return to our accustomed regularity with this new episode, in which we are going to address an issue which we have been requested to address by numerous esteemed and highly educated commentaries that have been submitted to our videos. This is also not just a theoretical issue, but the one connected with what is happening right now, including with things that are happening in American politics of the day. If you remember, we have touched on many conspiratorial theories during our episodes, but another one was about the many mysteriously influential Indians that spring up here and there in the White House and its immediate vicinity. So you might remember Vivek Ramaswamy, one of the comrades in arms to Elon Musk in his henceforth battle against American bureaucracy. The battle is not going too well, so we've been hearing about Elon, but we have not been hearing that much about Vivek. Nonetheless, we are hearing about Indians. And recently, we have been hearing a lot about an emerging Democratic candidate for the oncoming mayoral elections in New York, America's largest city. And surprise, he's also an ethnic Indian, although there are complexities there, and we are going to unravel these complexities. So today we are talking about the way Indian society is composed, and we are going to touch very carefully and yet adroitly, may I say, on the burning issue of caste. Again, we have been having queries about it since the day we started this illuminating podcast. And of course, this is the one thing that everyone wants to know about India. Is a caste still a thing? Does it characterize as a person? Does it determine who you are and whom you can become? What are the untouchables? How do you know what caste the person belongs to? How do Indians learn themselves about it? Does it work outside of India? What if you disobey the rules? What happens? Assassins come for you in the night? Are we just exoticizing an alien culture by applying all sorts of myths to it? So we are going to delve into this dangerous abyss and perhaps also touch on the way the Russian society is composed and whether we do not also have some sort of castes of our own. So with the help of my esteemed colleague, Pradnya Bivalkar, I'm going to abuse my privilege as a co-host and ask the stupidest questions. So that's the loveliest thing. So let's start with...
let's start at the beginning.
Let's start with the beginning. So there is Zohran Mamdani, a young, emerging, aspiring politician who has won the primaries in New York. And very likely he will become, or he may become, the next mayor of that city. So he was described, including described by Russian sources who are nothing if not conspiratorial, as a Muslim. He's a Muslim, he's not concealing that, as an Indian, and also as belonging to a privileged high-class family and to some mysterious ethnic minority which wields disproportionate influence both in India and abroad. So what is the truth about all this?
So I don't think there is an absolute truth. Let's put that disclaimer in big and bold and underline it. But there are complexities that kind of contribute to this conspiratory messaging. As we had also said, that a conspiracy theory is never completely imaginary. There are some elements of truth in it to make it believable. So is he Muslim? Yes, he is. Is he of Indian origin? Absolutely. Or rather, his mother is a very celebrated Indian filmmaker, Meera Nair, who comes from her family comes from the northern part of India, and she's a Punjabi Hindu for I think I don't like addressing people and put them in boxes in terms of religion and caste, but since today that is the topic, we can't not do it. So she is from North India, and his father, Mahmood Mamdani, he traces back his origins to the western part of India, which is the state of Gujarat, bordering to Pakistan. And this is a small community of Indian Muslims, the Khoja Muslims. And they are considered to be very influential in a good way, like people who have also contributed a lot to the society. And then I think his family moved somewhere to East Africa, specifically Uganda, and then his father moved to the US. So there's a whole history of migration.
Why would a privileged minority family from India move to Uganda?
Because they were traders. So Gujarat as a state is on the coast. It's on the Arabian Sea and has a huge coastline. So that's also a trader community. And that's how a lot of them moved into East Africa. So people who are interested in tracing histories of migration and feeding into this whole debate on influential ethnic Indians, politicians across the world, you guys should definitely listen to a podcast by William Dalrymple and Anita Anand on the origins of Rishi Sunak, Preeti Patel, and the likes, who traced their origins somewhere to East Africa and then going back to India or smaller island states in the in the region.
So there's a connection through trade routes between India and parts of Africa.
Through trade routes, but partly also because of some promises, tall promises that the British made to certain communities as a trade-off for their participation in the First World War. So it was like, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. But I don't want to give it away too much. I think whoever wants to listen to that should definitely look that episode up. Maybe we can put the link in the episode description.
This is how enlightenment spreads.
Yeah. So going back, so this is someone who has some Indian ethnicity in the background.
But he himself was not born in India or lived there.
No.
Or even his mother didn't live in India.
I think Meera Nair did for a while. And interestingly enough, most of her movies talk about elements of inequality, elements of migration. So they address a lot of these stories, which are now kind of, a part of the political discourse that Zohran kind of stands for, which is quite fascinating. But connecting the actual symptom of Zohran Mamdani to the basic root cause of this entire conversation and why it seems like a conspiracy theory one might want to buy into. So in India, I'm assuming that people who are listening to this don't have a lot of knowledge about the Indian caste system. So let's get a few things clear to give us some orientation. So there is the class and then there is the caste.
The caste, is it an Indian word?
No, it comes from the Portuguese word, casta, and it means lineage or race or your breed. So breed in context of humans doesn't really fit well, but lineage or
it gives you an idea.
It gives you an idea. So caste is necessarily something which is your jati in Sanskrit or in Sanskrit predominantly, and varna is your class. So Varna in Sanskrit again means...
Which is broader, which is more narrow?
The class is the broader
and
category.
That is, in Indian?
That is Varna.
Varna. So Varna... So what we call 5 castes in general European understanding, that's actually Varnas.
Yes.
And these are, can you
These are
name
the
them?
Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, the trader caste, and the Shudras who do the
manual work
and the labor. And then there is a 5th class of people who are considered not, for a lack of better word, human enough to be a part of the main societal conversation, and they are the Dalits or the untouchables.
These are the untouchables.
And these are the Avarna castes. So Savarna are the ones with a color, so they are actually considered as individual entities. And then there is the Avarna, which is the untouchables, and
all the rest Does it mean that there are these 4 divisions of proper, decent people?
Yes.
And then there's a mob, which is kind of faceless and colorless. So untouchables are not a separate tribe, like, I don't know, we have excluded communities in European history, like the Jews or the Roma people. But this is not like that.
So there are multiple tribes who fall under that class of being the untouchables. And these are the people who have done a lot of the physical labor, like manual scavenging, working in tanneries. So all the things that the people of class did not see themselves doing,
including the fourth, Varna, which is the
so they were
workers.
The better off in a way, because they were doing like farm labor and stuff like that. But
so farming, agricultural labor is decent.
It was dignified in a way, because you're producing to feed other people. But manual scavenging is, in a way, again, and this is not my opinion, I'm just using it here to explain.
So untouchables are not a specially cursed tribe, again, like the Jews in medieval Europe. It's just a lot of people who do not belong to
who are considered
society.
That they don't belong to the society. And to put it in a very historically correct context, so it's not that caste system did not exist in India before the British came. It existed in different ways and manners, and the way it was practiced was again very different and varied from region to region. Having said that, when the British came to India, they needed a framework to rule the people living in that part of the world, because the British policy was not to interfere too much with the personal lives of people, to keep the limit of or the amount of discontent to a bare minimum.
That's very wise when you do your little bit of colonizing.
A little bit, yeah. So what they did was they took a book, which was Manusmriti, which is considered to be a compilation of multiple scriptures that kind of codify the caste system in a vague way, and put it in a legal framework. So you give a lot of these things names, you put them in a structure, and that's how the caste is a system.
You are saying that the caste system was codified by the British?
So the codification, like I said, there were multiple scriptures, but you had to create one form.
So
for it to make
before
sense.
the Brits came, people didn't know they had castes?
They did, but you were born into it, and there was no way for the entire subcontinent to have the same practice.
So they unified it.
They codified it, and that became the basis of a lot of legal frameworks that even today are applicable. And that's the Hindu personal law.
So but now first we have to move from this Varnas to a more narrow subdivision, which is...
So let me give you a personal example. Again, without meaning to brag, this is my story, and I feel more comfortable sharing my story than someone else's story. So I had the benefit or the, the blessing of being born into a Brahmin family. So Brahmin is the class, and you cannot convert into classes. You are born into a class. Like you have the aristocracy, you have the monarchy, you are born into it. My family has a caste denomination, which is that of Koknast Brahmins. So this is a group of people who came from the coastal region of Maharashtra, which is my state, and fell under the class of the Brahmins. Then there are multiple other Brahmins. You have the Deshas Brahmins, Karare Brahmins, and so on and so forth, in the same state where I live in.
Are they all created equal, or do you have hierarchies?
So as a class, we are all equal. But even within ourselves, of course, there is this, it's a running gag about who is better. But I don't think there is a lot of animosity. So and where do you realize if there is animosity? So when it comes to issues around marriage, that's when you really see the tension simmering up. You have to imagine it in the European context. If someone from an aristocratic background wanted to marry someone from a workers' class.
So it is not legally prohibited, but the families will not be happy, and the unhappiness will be on both sides.
It is changing to some extent in some parts, especially in the rural, in the semi-urban and urban areas. But it's also unfair to say that all the urban areas are all very open-minded and evolved, because that's not true. But it is changing slowly and steadily. And every step forward is a step forward.
How does it affect your choice of a profession?
So
not everybody must marry, but we all have to work.
we all have to work, that's true. But if you want
Or
to,
were
again,
you born into a princely wealth?
I wish that was the case, but it wasn't. So you have to again consider a comparison which is understandable for European palate, and that is of the church and the clergy at a given point. So the people who worked in the church as clergymen or were priests they were not people of wealth, but they were people of influence, because they claimed for themselves the virtue of being the mediators between the God or the Holy Spirit and the people. And that is something that you can compare with the Brahmins as a class. These were the learned people. They were the people of the script. They could read, and they did not necessarily have a lot of wealth. In fact, accumulating too much wealth was not something that Brahmins did. But they were considered to be the moral authority in many
That's why
scriptures.
you can't eat meat or fish, right?
Technically, that used to be the case. But again, I think India is such a country where if you make one claim in exactly the same moment, you have the exact opposite claim being true. So, for instance, Bengali Brahmins, even if they are Brahmins, they consider eating fish as something which is totally they cannot not eat fish, even if they are Brahmins.
Your family wouldn't expect you to be a factory worker or to establish a trading firm.
No. Okay, again, like in a very traditional setup, that would not be the expectation of me. But to be fair, in a traditional setup, it would also not be an expectation of me as a woman. I would just be expected to stay at home, have kids, and run the household, to be specific, because not everything that came out of these kind of texts was something that you should be proud of. I wish I could have talked about the other part, which is the gender of the Manusmriti, how they treat genders and how marriage and caste is also very, very specifically intertwined, and how the agency of a woman is then completely taken away in that entire conversation. But that aside, so caste, we have the class and you have the caste. But what also happened is a lot of people, either because they thought that for them to escape being a part of the caste system, they had to leave the religion that they were born into, which was Hinduism in most of the cases. And Hinduism, like I've said multiple times, is not a uniform religion. It's a way of life. So you can have different interpretations of Hinduism. My Hinduism does not necessarily have anything to do with the Hinduism that my other family members may practice. And we have that freedom to do that.
Is the caste system only for the Hindus? Indian Muslims, do they have caste at all? Because I have read, again, in Russian sources, that in India, everyone has a caste.
Yes.
Muslims, Jews, atheists,
because
Europeans.
I think a lot of people who converted to these religions were converted.
So they were initially
So they had
Hindus.
some caste affiliation, class affiliation before they jumped the ship in a way. But having said that, they did not escape the caste or the class barrier just because of that. So even today, within the Indian Muslims community, there are castes, and intercaste marriage is frowned upon. Similarly for the Indian Christians. So they also trace back their lineages to different... the Catholics, Syrian Christians are people who used to be of Brahmin origin in a class sense. Whereas the Protestants, the Anglicans, they are people from lower castes who moved to the Protestant denomination after the Brits came and the missionaries came, and so it's a very colorful history, but the caste is a common thread only in the subcontinent.
If the stranger comes among you, a foreigner, do you place them into your caste system?
No, not necessarily.
So it doesn't apply to foreigners?
No. So I think there the skin of the color would play a role.
How?
Because, like I said,
so I arrived to India and I wish
you
to.
are white, so you are
so
Varna. You have a color. Literally, you have a color.
All right.
So, which means you are considered to be a part of the society. And as Indians, as with the colonial mindset, we have an obsession for the fair skin as a people.
So that kind of increases my chances of an advantageous marriage.
Yes, indeed.
Should I pursue one?
Were you to consider it at some point. But I think in those kind of situations, the caste debate doesn't follow you, because I think beyond a point, people can't place you. This, however, is different when two Indians want to get married to each other. Because
no matter where they are.
Usually when you tell people your name and your surname, not so much the name but the surname, it is like giving a visiting card to someone.
You said that already, but I thought it applies to people immediately recognizing what region are you from.
That too. So if I were to say, I don't know, my name is Krishnan Iyer. I don't know. So it definitely means I come from the southern part of India. It gives away my caste as an Iyer. And it also kind of helps people put me in a linguistic grouping because the region gives that away. So when I say I'm Pradnya Bivalkar, Bivalkar is a very uncommon surname. But if I were to say I'm Kulkarni, for all I know, Kulkarni is it's actually used to be a job description, but became a surname eventually. Just like in Germany, you would have the Schumacher or
Miller or
exactly. So similarly, so Kulkarni became a surname, and if you say
what profession is this?
There used to be people who would collect taxes from in the village, but of course from higher caste. So they were not people or the upper caste, the Brahmin caste. So
and by the way, bureaucrats, state servants, were they generally enrolled from the Brahmin caste or not necessarily?
Yes, when the British came, they used that to their advantage.
And the native rulers? Where did they get their
Also,
servants?
they also would employ the services because under the native rulers, it was easier to follow the class distinction.
Because people
everyone
didn't
had
move around so much.
everyone knew their place in the broad sense of the word. When the British came, they were completely confused. But they figured out that the Brahmins are the people who actually have a history of studying, learning. So they
was literacy limited to Brahmins?
At some point, yes. For the longest time.
How did the traders manage their trading?
I think literacy in terms of scriptures was limited to the Brahmins.
Reading the sacred texts.
Yes. But I think the British then were very smart. So even today, if you look back at the history of the Indian bureaucrats in the service of the British, they are usually people of upper caste lineage and upper class lineage and people who came from the other castes were then in the military, in the army, and very few people like the architect of the Indian Constitution, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who came from the lowest or the untouchable class, actually made it to the top through perseverance and all the kinds of efforts that went along with it, despite a lot of rejections from their own peers.
And what if you want to escape all that? For example, I come to America. I marry the first person I met in the street. I name my child Brittany, so no one will know what region or what caste am I from. What are the constraints, the inhibitions? My parents will disapprove, or will, again, nighttime assassins come and then take my head off?
It can vary. So if you marry across, like if you jump the ship and marry across classes, that becomes a big challenge. And there have been honor killings where people have been killed because they dared to jump the ship. And
is this a thing among, I don't know, urban dwellers, educated people?
I would not put it only to rural dwellers because that's not true. I think there are so many of them living in the urban spaces under the garb of liberal and being open-minded.
And they will still kill
They would still uphold these kind of situations. Wow. But I think this is like a very slippery slope, unending topic kind of a scenario. But connecting that conversation to Zohran Mamdani, that's where we started out. So he traces his lineage back to an area in India which has a lot of trade relations. In fact, the founder of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, also came from the same area and was also a Muslim who then became a very key figure in the whole struggle for independence and also then partition of India. So he has all of this in his background. But like I said, he's actually a child of globalization and actually has these two parts in his identity. One is that of, an Indian migrant moving out of India and then through East Africa coming back, and then his mother who's a filmmaker. So I would not say that and to be fair, not a lot of Indians have been very thrilled about Zohran Mamdani's rise because under the current political disposition, I think their values are very contradictory. Because Zohran Mamdani stands for a lot of being open and like supporting of pride and gay marriage and, you know, all the kind of things that point towards a very liberal mindset. And that's not as something that as a society that we are doing right now.
He's a Muslim supporting gay marriage, right?
Yeah. So I think that doesn't fly really well with conservative elements, and not just with the Hindu conservative elements, I think, in a broad sense. So a lot of people are not exactly like celebrating, oh, he's one of ours, as they would have wanted to do in other contexts like Ramaswamy or even the wife of J.D. Vance, Usha Vance.
Another influential Indian
Very
out there.
influential. Yeah.
So you see this conspiracy,
It's a conspiracy,
net kind of
yeah.
weaving itself.
We're trying really hard.
Oh,
I'm sitting
course.
here, so example of influential Indians. I wish that was true, but
no accident. There's a pattern.
There's a pattern, yes. But talking about patterns, you are also sitting here and representation,
which is also not accident.
Which is also a representation of a class affiliation. So let's talk about class system and social mobility and chances of social mobility across the Russian society. So if you were to like give me an answer like class in Russia for dummies, what would that look like?
Well, class is a Marxist concept in its, orthodox form. So class is determined by your economic performance, whether you own the means of reproduction or you sell your own labor. So you exploit or you are being exploited. Classes also are, for example, gentry and bourgeoisie and the working class. And then, according to Marxist theory, there's a contradiction between them, and the bourgeoisie allies itself to the working class, overthrows the nobility and gentry and the clergy together with them during the bourgeois revolutions. But in case of Russia, especially Soviet and post-Soviet Russia, although a lot of those things are carried on since pre-revolutionary times as yet, many sociologists talk not about classes, but about estates. Like in an ancien regime, France.
How many classes would you say there are? Would you say it's two, the exploiters and the exploited? Because that's one way of looking at it.
That's Marxist, and that is, again, kind of primitive, but also
what's a realistic division?
A workable hypothesis. But in case of Soviet and post-Soviet Russia, the exploiter is the state, of course, and everybody else is being exploited by the state, or you belong to the nomenklatura, to the great and terrible class who rule the country by combining privileged bureaucratic state positions and ownership of assets.
So would you say the definition of class has moved according to historical lines? So under the Tsarist Russia, it was a very different understanding of class?
In a Tsarist Russia, the country was divided through the table of ranks.
Yeah, so it's a different perception of class.
You see, how is it different? Class is something that grows from the ground upward, that kind of creates itself. But an estate or a rank is something that is appointed. It is appointed by the state. The state sets a table of ranks, as Peter I did, with its 14 divisions, 14 categories, from the lowest, the 14th, to the highest, the first rank. And there are military ranks, there are ranks of civil service, and there are ranks of court service. So these are three lines. They are slightly different from each other, but they follow more or less the same pattern. During Soviet times, no one had any private property, of course, or any ownership of assets except the state. So the state appointed people to positions and, of course, fired them from positions. So nomenklatura is not a class because it does not rest on ownership per se. Rights of property are famously unguaranteed in Russia. And that was even before the revolution, although not to that extent. So your position in society was not, again, even before the revolution, based on your pride of birth, but on your pride of rank. And of course, the difference is self-evident. You can be born into the purple of aristocracy, but the Tsar can appoint anyone. And they become aristocracy because your grandfather was nobody, but your father was a favorite, so he became, say, fourth class.
So there is a
space
for social mobility in a way.
In a way, but
to a certain extent.
Yes, but also for instability. And it was impossible to actually inherit something. It was possible, but the old nobility was in decline unless they managed to make their way in court, unless they managed to find favor with the ruling family. And it was more or less the same, but again, to a worse extent during Soviet times, because as I said, no one had any property. So you only have whatever you are appointed to, and everything is tied to that appointment. Your apartment is given to you. Your car and the driver is given to you, or it is not given to you. You are allowed to buy certain types of food, or you are not allowed. These were called privileges. After 1991, we were beginning to have market economy, so you could make your own money, and you could, which was even more important for post-Soviet Russians, you could own
property,
real estate.
So you could create equity for your future generation.
You could create something that could be passed on to your children. That is very, very recent, just like 30 years.
But that's also recent in Eastern Germany.
Yes.
Because that ties up with that way of life.
That is recent in all post-communist countries. So in this historical situation where you can't really have regional identity because people were moved around so much, and it's a very rare Russian who currently lives in a place where his parents were born, in a place, I don't mean in an apartment, that is almost impossible, but the town or the region. People moved because they had to, they were moved non-voluntarily, they were deported, they were sent to settle in some area, etc. So we are a nomadic society. We combine low social mobility with this nomadic homelessness, which is kind of a surprising combination of the worst in both worlds. But where do you place your identity in this situation? When we look at sociological surveys, for example, trying to find out the values of Russian society.
The value survey, the global value survey.
Yes, the World Value Survey, which was Eurobarometer in Russian territory. So we try to find out, the sociologists try to find out what people identify with. Because we have low levels of trust that's notorious, both interpersonal trust and trust in institutions, institutional trust. People are atomized. When you ask a Russian who can be trusted, the most popular answer is no one. The second most popular is family. But judging by the rate of divorce and the amount of alimony debt, we are not a very friendly, family value friendly society either. We have a kind of theoretical respect for a family, and again, it will be a very popular answer that success in life is having a family and, you know, providing for your family. But in reality, 7 out of 10 marriages end in divorce in the course of the next 5 to 7 years. So that's sad statistics. Again, I'm painting what would seem to be the ruins of a society.
So, but if we were to draw parallels with the Indian,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but so we had the learned class, you had the traders, you had the fighters, you had the people who were doing the manual labor, and then you had people who were in a way faceless, to put it that way.
So in this ruinous situation that I'm describing, almost the only identity out there, because again, religious identity is not that important for Russians. It's more prominent in the Northern Caucasus, where people identify as Muslims, but even in such Muslim regions like Tatarstan or Bashkortostan, it doesn't stand high on the list of things people identify with. So what do we have? We have professional affiliations. Again, surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, Russians identify with their professional group. Nomenklatura is in a way also a professional group. What do you do? I do what my parents did. What did your parents do? They were, as the phrase is, руководящие работники. They were managerial personnel. They were running something, or they were in the military or in security services. So it's highly likely that you'll be in the same boat as well. Or again, you cited your own example. I will cite my own example. We are teachers, school teachers and university teachers. My parents, my grandparents, my great-grandparents, as far as our, again, sadly, very limited historical memory stretch, they were teaching something to somebody, either at a school or at a university.
So the Russian Brahmins, in a way.
Well, in a way, we are the Russian intelligentsia. We are not expected, again, as the Brahmins are not expected to be rich. That is not a thing. That is, I can say it's thrown upon, but perhaps it is. But nor do we expect to be powerful in a way of occupying important political positions. But we expect to be listened to.
But you're influential.
And be influential in this specific way.
Like the ruling class would have your ear, in a way.
Yes, and when that does not happen, we feel that something is wrong with the society. I like the theory of the French philosopher, social philosopher, Pierre Bourdieu, about habitus. So what is habitus? According to him, habitus is this whole composition of a persona that combines the way people dress, what they eat, what they drink, what they work at, how they behave, where they are supposed to live. So your kind of way of life that includes and envelops and sort of...
like the habitat you inhabit.
Yes, that too. That, again, makes your whole personality. That is habitus. And what I like specifically is his idea that freedom is the opportunity, the possibility of behaving according to your habitus. Which is his answer to the Marxist definition of freedom, which is conscious necessity. Freedom is understanding why you need to do this and that, which is a kind of depressing definition. But the one by Bourdieu, I like it better because it explains, when you start analyzing yourself, not as a unique individual, but as a social item, social entity, then you can perceive that, for example, as my children would say, beef with the current Russian government is that they wouldn't let me live according to my habitus.
Yeah, so that would have been my question. So you said that as the learned or the Russian intelligentsia, we start getting a little shifty or unsettled when we realize that the ruling class doesn't have our ear, or they don't want to listen to.
We don't have theirs.
In both ways. So I'm sure you're right now in that position. You don't have the ear of the Russian ruling class, but probably the others are making up for it. I don't know.
Well, I have a teaching position at a German university, which adds hugely to my self-satisfaction and to my general satisfaction with life, because, again, according to, within the limits of this habitus theory, you feel that this is something you are, again, I don't like the phrase, but entitled to. That's what you were born to do. Yes. And if you are denied that, you feel... First, you feel surprised, you can believe it, you can understand what is happening, then you kind of course, use the instruments of sociological and political analysis, and you get the idea of what is happening.
I think social mobility is a very different concept in India. So I think even if you are born into a caste, even if you try to escape the caste definition and the class definition, it never leaves you. So you might want to run away from it, but it is not going to run away from you.
When I was younger, I was not expected to be a teacher. No one told me that I have to be.
So
I did quite different things.
So I have the book here. This is my PhD book. So I wrote my PhD on...
Let us show it. It's a monumental one, you see?
So in my PhD...
It has pictures.
It has a lot of pictures. It's very illustrative. So... I focused on how
colorful pictures
issues around caste and society and globalization, modernization, conflicts, all of that finds its way into Indian cinema. And one example keeps coming back to my mind, which is that from a movie called Swadesh, which translated means my homeland. And this is an Indian American who goes back to India after 14, 15 years and is trying to, bring about social change because, that's what his American persona is telling him to fight against inequality, human rights and all of that. And then he goes and visits a farmer who is under massive debt. And he says, he asks him, so what went wrong? You know, like you have this farmland, you can cultivate it. So this person is sitting in a small hut without any electricity, and he says, I wish I had an answer for this particular question, because I was born into a caste which expected me to do a certain role. I tried to break free of it when I realized that, so he was supposed to be a weaver. And once the weaving as a profession became a very machinized profession, he could not sustain that with a hand loom. So he tried becoming a farmer. He became a farmer, he was able to lease some land. But when it came to having water for his crops in the face of drought, the influential castes or the classes in the village refused to give him water for a crop that was standing. So he lost a standing bunch of crop because they would not allow him to
Why?
farm.
Because he was from the wrong caste?
Because he dared to jump the class.
And they did not approve of it?
No.
Although he was not a relative?
No. And I think this is a very contradictory conversation. Maybe next time we can actually do a deep dive into it, because on the one hand, the Indian government made it compulsory and mandatory to have reservations in the public service space for people to come up, also have education, and get over this generational trauma.
Can you stand for electoral office?
I could. I'm not an Indian citizen anymore. This is too much information, but okay, I want that to be cut out.
If you are from whatever caste, can you run for office?
Yes, we could.
So legally, there's equality.
Legally, there's equality, but in the eyes of the law, they tried to create frameworks for people who had been subjected to generational discrimination, for them to come up. This is like positive discrimination. And it was supposed to be phased out at some point. But by the time it was supposed to be phased out, people realized that there is a lot of potential in it to garner a lot of political power based on caste identity and class identity. So it never was phased out. And here we are 78 years down the line, or rather 75 years down the line, because 1950 we adopted the constitution. So 75 years down the line, we are still grappling with this whole situation.
But maybe this caste system is the reason why, for example, Indian diaspora is so successful in the United States. Does it give you more stability or more social cohesion?
Not really. I think a lot of people also who move to the US also move to kind of overcome this whole conversation around meritocracy in India. Because then people would say, oh, but you got this position because you belong to a caste through your reservation. You didn't deserve it. And so even if you have all the paperwork saying otherwise, that you had good grades, you got good marks, there will always be that element of you not being taken seriously. So a lot of people actually chose to go away to feel that they were just as good.
But inside the diaspora, these caste differences still work.
Yes. They are a little fainter, because then the regional alliances kind of play a more important role. But they would still be there. But I think this is a good point for us to stop today's conversation.
So much in there. We have just peeped into the abyss.
Yeah, we've just scratched the surface.
Yes.
But we hope to be back sometime very soon without going off the record for a month. But I think after last time's recording, which a lot of people complained about because the sound quality was not so good, we didn't really have much of an option to not record for a while.
But this last episode was heroically recorded by Pradnya from the privacy of her bed when she couldn't actually sit up. So it was a miracle that we did that at all. But I hope that in terms of voice quality and picture quality, this will make amends for the previous
and the content
experiment.
of it. And the content of it.
Yes. So if you have anything to say about the usefulness
or any specific questions you would like us to address,
or other questions we have not addressed, please feel free to share it with us. We have, again, a highly educated audience commenting on our videos.
And like I said, we already gave away the topic of the next conversation, which is the social mobility and the whole contradictory conversation between reservations and quotas versus the barring of the caste system from in the legal sense.
So we'll still be treading the fields of social science and societal knowledge. So
thank you for joining
keep watching us, and thank you for your attention.